Welcome to Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm Greg Bluestein, here with Washington Bureau Chief Tia Mitchell. Hey, Tia.
Hey, Greg.
We've got a big day because nearly 3 weeks after the Supreme Court weakened a major section of the Voting Rights Act, the political consequences are now on a collision course here in Georgia. Governor Brian Kemp has called lawmakers back for a special session next month to redraw political maps for the 2028 election. Republicans say they're just responding to a new political and legal reality. Democrats say it's an attempt to lock in political power before voters choose Georgia's next governor. Joining us for the full episode is Georgia Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock, who has warned that this fight extends far beyond redistricting maps. Well, Senator, we want to get to the fallout of the Supreme Court ruling here in Georgia first. But let's first, we're coming off a primary where Democrats unified behind Keisha Lance Bottoms for governor, while Republicans are now in for a month of infighting in the Senate race, in the governor's race. What do you think that election, the primary on Tuesday, told us about where Democrats stand right now?
Well, first of all, I want to applaud and celebrate the amazing and historic turnout that we saw during this primary. It demonstrates that Democrats are all fired up, that Georgia is paying attention. Look, Donald Trump made a whole lot of promises that he is breaking in real time. He's clearly not focused on the struggles of ordinary people. He said that he would lower their costs. Every day he's been in office, he's been raising them. These tariffs are crushing shoppers in your local grocery store, and those same prices are crushing our farmers who are providing the food that's in the grocery stores. Your gas prices are going up. And so the people of Georgia are witnessing all of that. They're showing up, and there's a lot of excitement. And that's always good, especially for Democrats. We do better when people turn out, when people show up, because quite frankly, more people support our policies than the other side, which is why they're busy trying to suppress voters.
Senator Warnock, one of the reasons why we wanted to get you back on the podcast is you have been very vocal ever since the Supreme Court ruling that weakened the Voting Rights Act. And we know that voting rights has been something you've been talking about throughout your tenure in the Senate. What about the Supreme Court ruling, and the fallout that we're already seeing, including in states like Georgia, what about it is so problematic for you? Why is it so bad, in your opinion?
Well, voting rights are preservative of all other rights. Whatever else we might be fighting for in the democracy, healthcare, housing, a country where every child, kids like me who grew up in public housing, has a path to get the kind of education that they need to then live the American dream, the climate emergency. The democracy is the context in which we get to fight for these things. Democracy is the house that we actually live in. And so when you go after that, it's like setting the house on fire. And so that's why I've always been so passionate on this issue, and I'll continue to do the hard work. What the Supreme Court did the other day is devastating. It's a massive blow to the progress led by Martin Luther King Jr., whose church I still lead, and those who marched alongside him set the table for us. I would not be sitting in the Senate were it not for the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which, by the way, has always been updated on a bipartisan basis up until the last few years. The last time it passed, the Senate was under a Republican president, George W. Bush, and the vote was 98-0. But this new MAGA Republican Party doesn't believe in democracy. They believe in power. And they are trying to hold on to power at any cost, which is why they're busy trying to pass the SAVE Act. I'd be happy to talk to you about that. They're certainly not trying to save the democracy. And they are being aided and abetted by a Supreme Court which has too many partisans, and in my view, a couple of political hacks who are aiding and abetting Donald Trump's power grab, and as they try to shape America into their own dystopian image.
Senator, let me ask you about that Republican response. There's the SAVE Act. There's also what Republicans here in Georgia are saying under the Gold Dome about why they need a redistricting session in June to redraw the maps in 2028. Governor Kemp and other Republicans say the special session is simply Georgia responding to that Supreme Court ruling. They're basically saying that these maps are now illegal. They're not illegal as they stand now, but they're making that argument. What do you think this is really about?
It's about power. I mean, pure and simple. It's about power. And race is up in that mix, right? Black voters are at the center of this debate. But I'm really clear. This is about power. And people who are hungry for power, they will use anything to hold on to that power. They will use race and the politics of race if necessary. But they're also trying to marginalize women as they're trying to pass the SAVE Act. It would greatly make it difficult for a lot of women, a lot of people, but women in particular, to register to vote as you require people to bring a birth certificate or bring a passport. A lot of people can't find either one, and if your name doesn't match, anyway, that it hadn't passed. But all of this, the point that I'm making is that while black voters are at the center of the debate over these last couple of weeks in light of the Calais decision, the same people who don't want too many black folks showing up to vote, they don't want too many women to show up to vote, they don't want students to show up to vote, they don't want working class people to show up to vote, which is why they're fighting mail-in voting, early voting, the kinds of things that would allow workaday people who don't have the privileges of some of us to show up on a Tuesday to vote. The answer to this all-out assault on our democracy, quite frankly, is more democracy. We need the voters to push past this, and I think we saw that last night and over the last few weeks, to refuse to be demoralized and discouraged, to show up. Part of how you fight this is you show up. But then I've got some ideas about what we need to be doing in Congress if we can flip the House and or the Senate.
I want to get with you on that. But before we get to what Congress can do, I do want to stay here as far as you talked about Democratic turnout being strong in the primary in Georgia. We know that particularly among black voters, there is real concern, real fear about what the Supreme Court ruling and now the redistricting in southern states could do for black representation. But what I want to ask you to help our listeners understand, because I've been talking about for black people, black representation is more than just having someone who looks like you in a position of power.
It's about your interests.
Can you talk about what is the benefit in the eyes of black voters of having black representation, not just in Congress, but in your city council or your county commission or your general assembly? Is there a benefit other than just people who look like you serving?
No, representation, informs policy. All of us have different world experiences because of where we were born. We didn't get to pick our parents. We all come from different backgrounds. We have different life experiences. And the Congress works best. Your local city council works best when it looks like America, when you have that kind of representation. And the Supreme Court has just been totally dishonest about the history of this in the South. This idea that you can engage in partisan gerrymandering, but we're not going to allow you to have a majority-minority district. They are being dishonest. It is as if partisan gerrymandering is over here somewhere. Racial gerrymandering is over there. Because of specific historic reasons, those things are essentially the same thing in the South. Lyndon Baines Johnson understood that. When he passed the Civil Rights Bill into law, he said, "I'm afraid that I just gave the South away to the Republicans for the next who knows how long, for a long time," he said. And the Dixiecrats, the old Democrats in the South and the old Democrat Party, they left and went to the Republican Party. That's where they are. So, I love when Republicans talk about the party of Lincoln as if they don't know that happened. The Dixiecrats went to the Republican Party. A lot of black Republicans, including Daddy King, Martin Luther King Jr.'s father was a Republican. They went to the Democratic Party. So what I'm saying is there was this generational realignment of the parties. And so when you're talking about having voters have their voices heard and be represented in a democracy, you can't act as if that did not happen, let alone the fact that how do we know where people live? How do we know where people live in this country based on race, except that we've got a long way to go with building a truly colorblind society. And yet, the Supreme Court would have us pretend that we're there, that we don't take race into account at all in a matter where race is at the base and the center of the whole thing. If I had my druthers, we'd get rid of gerrymandering. But what they've done is they've gotten rid of one and left the other in place, which essentially creates majority gerrymandered districts for which black people and other minorities have no recourse. And that's bad for the democracy. And black voters understand it at a visceral level, which is why they're showing up. And I think that the Republicans have overreached here. And it's gonna be hell to pay. I don't know if that's good preacher language come November, because the people are coming to get their power back.
We'll give you a pass on that, Senator. I want to ask you about next steps because, as you mentioned, the election in November, you're saying more democracy will bring more democracy in that sense. The voter participation will help. But June, the day after the runoff in Georgia, is when lawmakers go back to the Capitol to redraw. We're expecting obviously at least one, but as many as 2 or 3 Democratic-held districts to be designed now for Republicans to hold. Republicans have the majority. Right now they have the majority in Congress as well. What can Democrats do to stop this?
Well, let me just say, first of all, it's a betrayal. And we should be really full-throated and clear-eyed about that. It is a betrayal of the highest in the American ideals, and the same politicians who will be lining up, some of them wanting to come to my church in January and sing praises to Martin Luther King Jr. and remember him or dismembering his legacy in real time. We have to say that. It's a contradiction. It's hypocrisy with deep consequences for ordinary people in this country. I'm going to be doing everything I can. Folks need to show up in June as Governor Kemp leads this effort to diminish the voices of citizens in his own state. What they ought to be doing in June is getting together to figure out how to expand Medicaid. How about that? Try to actually do something for the people. If you do something for the people, you don't have to try to diminish their voices. These are politicians running scared. Gerrymandering takes democracy and turns it on its head, so that rather than the people picking their representatives, craven politicians are busy carving up districts, trying to pick their own voters. Gerrymandering is politicians talking way too much. Because when the way voters are heard is through voting. The way voters get to have their way is through voting. The way politicians get to have their way, in spite of what the voters are saying, is through gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is like voters being forced to bring the politicians and their enablers with them into the voting booth. We have noisy and rambunctious arguments in this country about the direction of the country, about war, about peace, about what we're going to do for our children, about Social Security, about health care, and voters get to hear us while we make our case. After the elected officials, after the politicians, Democrats and Republicans, have made their case, they ought to shut up and let the voters go in the poll and let their voices be heard. All of this gerrymandering and drawing the lines and all of it, these are ways that politicians are dominating the conversation through gerrymandering, through dark money, and they're squeezing the voices of ordinary people, black voters, women, poor people, working class people, out of their democracy. And for me, it's bad for democracy. I'll tell you this, I'm a Democrat, but I think I think, Greg, I think the whole country would be better off if we had more competitive congressional races. I wish we had more districts that a Democrat or a Republican could win if they'd make a good argument. And it's the reason why we don't get enough things done in this building, because people are only concerned about their primaries, which are the result of all of this gerrymandering. And the Supreme Court has done us a terrible disservice. If we win, when we win in November, I think we ought to take the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We ought to chop it up into little pieces, including the piece on gerrymandering, and we ought to make Republicans vote on it every single day, hold them accountable, and then hopefully we get a trifecta in 29. I'd love to see a Democrat president, House and the Senate, pass voting rights, no matter what. And then let's have the argument between us and our Republican friends about the direction of the country.
Senator, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to go right into how Democrats are responding to this Supreme Court decision in Georgia and in Congress. This is Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Welcome back to Politically Georgia. Greg Bluestein here with Tia Mitchell and Senator Raphael Warnock.
So to your point about what Congress can do, there is now a conversation among Democrats as to whether they should start being more aggressive in this issue. As you're probably aware, the Congressional Black Caucus House members recently killed a bill that was about name, image, and likeness for college athletes. And I want to play a clip from Derek Johnson, who's the head of the NAACP, who called on high school athletes to reconsider attending schools in states that he believes are undermining voting rights.
We are calling on athletes who are coming out of high school not to attend any state-funded schools of states that have moved to minimize our right to vote, to minimize our ability to elect candidates of our choice, and states that are seeking to create a sharecropping reality. Whether that state be Missouri or Mississippi, whether that state is South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, Texas, or Florida. 55% of all African Americans live in the former Confederate South. But the 55% of us who live in the former Confederate South, we will not tolerate a Confederate mentality on our labor, on our ability to contribute, and our ability to have representation.
And the question for you is, when it talks about sharp elbow tactics like killing bills, leaning on businesses, primarying Democrats who won't commit to killing the filibuster, is that where you think, are you in favor of going there in hopes of getting voting rights legislation passed?
I think that we are in a all hands on deck moment, and different people will take different approaches to that, but it is definitely an all hands on deck moment. I have to tell you that I came to the Senate in the 117th Congress in 2021. We did a lot of things in that Congress. We passed the American Rescue Plan, which included the child tax credit, which cut child poverty by 40% for 6 months. We passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill after others had talked about it for years. We did CHIPS in science. We did things for our veterans. We passed the largest clean energy bill in human history. We gave Medicare the ability to negotiate the price of prescription drugs. Whole range of things in one Congress that I'm very, very proud of. But I was saying back then that we had better find a way to pass these voting rights bills. And I felt that way because we were on the heels of January 6th, where literally there were those who were trying to, who attacked the Capitol. And then we saw that cancer, if you will, metastasize in voter suppression bills in state houses all across the country. And I was saying to my colleagues then that we had better center voting rights. And so while I'm proud of all of those things we passed, we're literally watching a rabidly illegal and corrupt administration undermine much of the things that we got done. And so I'd give all of those bills if I had to in exchange for the voting rights piece and more democracy in our country, including Supreme Court reform, dealing with the ethics of the Supreme Court. I think the people, the citizens of Washington, D.C. deserve to have a voice in Congress. What I want is more democracy. And I think we've got to take this seriously, and we need various approaches to this very, very serious problem.
Senator Warnock, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Politically Georgia. If you've got a question you'd like us to answer here on Politically Georgia, you can call our hotline anytime, day or night. Leave a question. We'll answer it right here on the show during our next Monday mailbag segment. The number is 770-810-5297. And if you enjoy what you heard today, please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. We'll talk to you next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
Thanks for listening to the Politically Georgia podcast. Our executive producer is Shane Backler. AJC's head of audio is Sam Stamler. Production support from our partners at Goat Rodeo, including Kara Schillen, Hazel Hoffman, and Max Johnston. For more of our political coverage, visit ajc.com/politicallygeorgia. And we invite you to support local journalism by subscribing to the AJC. Join us again next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.